Hi, I'm very happy to announce the publication of my little book that I've called The French Way of War, 8 Strategy Lessons for Today's Conflicts. Now, this book is so new, I don't even have a copy to show you. Otherwise, I'd like to show it off, so I'm just going to show you the cover. The book is internationally available from Amazon, either as a print-on-demand paperback or as a Kindle ebook. Now, let me explain to you what this book is, this little book. This book is a distillation. This is a distillation of many, many years that I've spent. I have strange hobbies reading French military strategy and reading French army doctrine. I've read hundreds and hundreds of pages of the doctrine officially, these official French army publications. Plus, I've read basically every major significant military theorist I can get my hands on. I've been working on this stuff for years. I've been reading deeply about it years. I've published bits and pieces about it. I've talked about it in the videos. I've talked about it in my different essays that I've written on my Substack. And I wanted to take some of it and distill it out into this sort of concise form that lays out these key insights that I think are particularly interesting and particularly useful for thinking about conflicts today. For instance, in this little book, I draw mostly on, I've read dozens and dozens of people, but in this little book, I draw mostly on the following. I draw on Ferdinand Foch, who I consider to be like the real starting point of modern French military strategy. This is his Principles of War from 1903. As you can see, I've made some annotations. Then secondly, we have General Andre Wolf, who's probably my favorite military strategist of all. This is his most important little book. He's written many books. I have them all, just not with me at the moment. I've read them all. They're fabulous. This is his introduction to strategy. It's an amazing, amazing book. If you read one work of military strategy, I would say to read this book. And then, of course, we can't forget my favorite French naval theorist, Admiral Raoul Castex, who wrote this. These are all 5 volumes of his Théorie Stratégique. These are monstrous books, which I read, and so you don't have to. But anyways, he's absolutely amazing. And then there are some other more contemporary writers that I've read and talk about in the little book, including this guy here, General Michel Yakovlev, who's alive and well and very often on French television these days. This is a book that he wrote called Tactique théorique, which is absolutely fascinating. It's almost like a manual for French army officers. I've seen it on the desks of many a French officer. Anyways, I've got all the stuff. I read all the stuff, and there are these 8 lessons that I derive from all of it that I wanted to talk about, and I just wanted to introduce. And I think that these are very powerful ideas. These are ways of thinking about modern conflict. So what are they? So they are the following: liberty of action, initiative, maneuver, and the French have a very particular understanding of the word maneuver that I talk about in the little book. Effet majeur, which is a French concept. It's all about trying to understand the thing that you need to do that's going to guarantee you some sort of success. I mean, it's beyond that, but I think it's very interesting. It's a fascinating concept. And I think it's very distinctly French in its approach, and it's one of the things that distinguishes French military thinking from American military thinking. Then also will, or the primacy of will, indirect strategy, grand strategy or total strategy, depending on whom you're talking to. And finally, we get servitudes, which is a concept that is associated with Admiral Castex. In each of these, I discuss them, I talk about the concept, and I cite where appropriately, where the Castex or the Wolf or the Yakovlev or whatever it is, and I present it. Now, I know that some of you probably look askance at the idea of reading French military strategy. I mean, these are the cheese-eating surrender monkeys, so what could we possibly learn from the French? And honestly, I think this has got it all wrong. France's military catastrophes of the 19th and 20th century, so 1870, 1940, Indochina, Suez, Algeria, these were all catastrophes. But the benefit of the catastrophes is that this taught French officers very hard lessons. And these forced French officers and French military theorists to think really hard about what the heck happened and what went wrong. And I promise you, the generation that followed the War of 1870 was obsessed with 1870 and was desperate to understand how did they blow it and how are they going to get it right this time. Likewise, the generation that survived 1940, and everyone after in the French military is obsessed about 1940. What the heck happened? How do we understand this failure? Similarly, those who were involved in Suez, Indochina, Algeria, these are all cases in which the French military performed brilliantly, and yet they lost the wars. The French learned the hard way. They learned hard lessons. They could not rest on their laurels because they didn't really have any laurels to rest on, except for World War One. Of course, all the Napoleonic stuff. But this forced them to think. And the good thing also about French officers is that they're trained to think, and all of them write very, very well. I find, having read also a lot of American military thought and a lot of American military doctrine, this stuff isn't nearly as interesting. It's not nearly as intelligent. It's not nearly as well written. I mean, that almost goes without saying. But most importantly, what you find in the American military writing is you find complacency and you find hubris and sort of an unwillingness to learn from failures because the failures are somehow written off or excused. It doesn't really mean anything. So it's like the Americans are resting on laurels. Laurels won when? World War II, maybe? It's kind of been a while. The French don't really have that. The Americans also have abundance, and they approach warfare from this point of view of, well, we can do anything because we have massive, unlimited resources, and we can think big and think pie in the sky, whereas the French approach it from the point of view of scarcity. You don't have the resources, you don't have the means. You have to think modestly. What can you possibly achieve? How can you possibly do it? How do you balance your ways and your means and make sure that you have realistic means and ends? You have to worry about that when you're dealing with scarcity versus abundance. And I think the abundance that the American military has made it, dare I say, intellectually lazy. I would strongly urge you to get my book, read it. Let me open your eyes to a different way of approaching military strategy, a different way of approaching conflict, a different way of thinking about conflict while you're reading it, as I did, because I would talk about these ideas, these 8 lessons, and also talk about historical conflicts and contemporary conflicts a little bit of Gaza, a little bit of Iran, a little bit of Ukraine. You're going to do the same thing, and I would encourage you to do this because this is not meant to be a historical work. This is not about learning Indochina. This is about lessons that the French took from Indochina that are relevant today. Everything is relevant today. Otherwise, this stuff is only of historical interest. And I promise you this stuff is of far greater than historical interest. Now, for those of you who might complain and say, oh, I want more, Michael, I want more information about these thinkers. And then what about these other thinkers, all these other guys that you didn't talk about? General Guy Aubin, General Vincent Desportes, the counterinsurgency doctrine. What about the French nuclear deterrence theory, all that kind of stuff? If you want more, don't worry, there's more coming. I have been slowly marinating and preparing the big book that is too slow to arrive because I'm doing all this stuff in my free time. But that is going to be basically a compendium of the major thinkers of French military, modern French military strategists from Foch all the way up to General Vincent Desportes with stops with General Guy Brosselet, and naval stuff and nuclear deterrence and counterinsurgency, Bijard, Hogar, and all that kind of good stuff. Gulula, I talk about Gulula, all that. Anyways, stay tuned. It's coming. So let this be the appetizer, and the main course will be arriving, I don't know when, but it should satisfy your appetite for this stuff. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy my little book. Bye-bye.